Hi, I'm Alexander Bard. I'm co-founder of Giant Enemy Crab, and I'm the creative director on Due Process.
So Alex, for people who don't know, can you talk about what is Due Process? It's a very unique game.
Yeah, well, it's a tactical shooter where really the tactics are front and center this time. I think there are a lot of things out there that focus on, say, realistic weaponry or gadgets, but we wanted to make a game where you're planning and executing every round with your team, and you're thinking very hard about how you're going to approach new tactical situations, and you're not just playing the same map meta over and over again.
Yeah, the closest game I can compare it to would be Rainbow Six Siege. I mean, that's really the only other game that really puts the T in tactical shooter, you know?
Yeah. We started development about 6 months before they announced. It was pretty spooky then, but as time has gone on, it's clear that we've gone in two very different directions with our games. I would say that with only difference being our weapon handling, right? I would say that we're actually kind of closer to Counter-Strike than Siege, because our game, it's not about operators or characters or ability usage, right? But it's more about, using a more limited toolkit to focus on playing as a team, if that makes sense.
It does, and I have to ask because I'm curious. Your studio name is hilarious. Where did you get the idea for Giant Enemy Crab? What was the? There's got to be a story behind that.
Oh yeah, it's from. Gosh, I can't remember what the name is. From some, I think it was a Sony press conference at E3. They're showing off this game where this guy in the same breath basically says, this is a game based on real Japanese history, and then immediately there's a smash cut to, and here we have a giant enemy crab, and you can flip it over for massive damage is I think the gag. But we were spitballing names and that came up, and it just seemed very evocative and kind of representative of the studio's not so serious tone.
So a lot of first-person shooters, especially tactical shooters, they like to go the super, like you mentioned before, the super realistic art style. But your art style is very unique and different. You're not going for the surreal Black Ops or modern military look at all.
Yeah, we chose actually arcade games like Time Crisis or Sega Rally or that kind of stuff, right? Those games are very simplistic in their style and they're very easily readable. And we think that that's actually a very important quality for this game, is to have legibility, right? And not be engaged in a pixel hunt as many tactical shooters kind of break down to. The other thing of why we chose our style was being freed from strict expectations of realisms, like one-shot headshots. Really does allow us to focus on making a game that's really about playing with your team and not about just raw individual skill, because these two things are really diametrically opposed if you think about it. The more one person's able to clutch a game and win it single-handedly, the less teamwork matters by definition. And so that's a big reason why we chose the art style we did.
Yeah, I mean, the word carry is used a lot in multiplayer team-based games, where you could have four players that are doing very poorly and one player doing exceptionally well, and you could still win because of that carry person on your team.
Yeah, in our game, the carry is typically the shot caller. It's the guy making a plan who is sort of accounting not only for the enemy's disposition and skill, but his own team's, right? That is choosing a plan that his team is capable of executing and making sure that they've got the right timing to carry it out. It goes a long way,
The game is 5v5. Can you talk about what each team's objective is during a match?
Right now, we just have a standard bomb defusal mode. It's a bit different, more simplified than Counter-Strikes or Valorants or even Sieges. The bomb is already set up and it's placed by our level generation process. So it's really not about getting to the site. It's about figuring out how to defend the site, and then the attackers need to break through to defuse it, right? We're basically taking the most important part of the bomb game loop and making it about that instead of having a two-part process, because then planning would break down. The way the game works is there's 3 rounds, and over the 3 rounds, you've got an armory on each side, and whatever gear you take in and doesn't come back out, right? So the attackers, the enforcers, they're armed with, a bunch of modern weaponry, right? They've got just what you would expect a strike team to have. And then the defenders have basically a bunch of relic weaponry from all sorts of different and interesting places. But really where it comes down to is the attacker's gear. Their breach capability is in 3 explosive charges, 2 door charges and wall charge. And a lot of the meta of the game is figuring out when the attackers are going to use their explosive charges to gain an advantage in a level, and figuring out when they're going to try and save.
I feel like it's kind of like reverse Counter-Strike. When you're playing Counter-Strike, you're just getting, like, the more kills you get, you're getting better and better weapons as the match goes on. But in this one, when you die with your loadout, the loadout's gone, you have to get a less powerful loadout or change the way you play with a new loadout, and it kind of like basically mixes up the matches, so they're extremely different from one another.
Yeah, on the enforcer side, they play very consistently because they've got basically 3 weapons, and you're able to really learn those recoil patterns and focus on playing consistently with them. On the defender side, it's much more improvised, and so you're typically using a vast array of weapons. Another thing is that it's very popular in the game to pillage weaponry from each side. So whichever side wins, they typically take weapons from the other team. In the case of the defenders, they're typically taking attacker weaponry because they're armed with flashlights and lasers, and their weapons are armor piercing, so they do more damage against the enforcers. On the attacker side, the enforcer side, they're trying to pick up defender power weapons typically. So sniper rifles, automatic shotguns, that kind of stuff. Because once they gain those weapons, they can start building a plan around, we're going to breach with this auto shotgun and take the bathroom and knock out the lights, for instance. That might be a plan they'd make.
Can you talk about some of the challenges when designing a competitive multiplayer tactical game that's revolved around voice communication, or needs voice communication, or just is better with voice communication, as opposed to games like, other games where people don't even have their voice turned on and don't want to talk to their teammates in a tactical shooter, and they just want to kind of go in and do their own thing? Like, what are some of the challenges when trying to implement that into a game and say, no, you really do need to talk to your team. It really is necessary to use voice chat.
Our perspective is this is where it's valuable to be indie, right? If you're making a game that is for everyone on the face of the earth, it means that you have to make deep concessions to your game, meaning that you can play a game like Rainbow Six Siege or Counter-Strike without voice, right? And in many cases, you can do better if you don't focus on voice communication, right? In our game, it's necessary, right? You may not have to be terribly chatty, right? But someone on your team is going to have to make a plan, and there are only 5 people, right? And it's usually a collaborative effort. People, when the game starts working well is when you've got a team that kind of gels well and they talk to each other. But this game, there's no way to make this game without basically saying, at the end of the day, people are going to have to talk to each other and make a coherent plan, because that's what the game's about, right? So where other games would focus on sort of making the game friendly to non-vocal players, right? We're more focused on, this is a game for people who do actually want to coordinate with each other. And to that end, we're focusing on more social features aspect of just trying to get people to start playing together consistently and make friends within the game. And that's kind of how we plan to attack those challenges.
What are some of the challenges when making a first-person shooter game in 2020? Specifically because I feel like a lot of game developers, whether indie or AAA, they get compared to one of 3 games: Battlefield, Call of Duty, or Counter-Strike.
Yeah, I mean, I think those comparisons will endure, right? Because all of those games, those 3 first-person shooters are where they are today because they're catering to a certain aspect of the broader first-person shooter genre, right? And they're not going to go away because they're really good, right? I think on the other end, though, if you've been playing a lot of first-person shooters for a long time, there's really only so much those games can offer, right? And that's why you have so many shooters beyond those 3, right? Because they're all trying to pick at experiences that are a bit broader than what those things can offer, because they are catering to the widest audience possible, right? And that does kind of limit their moves in a way. But I gotta say, I mean, we've got a very deep respect for all 3 of those games, you know?
And then what's it been like working with Annapurna as a publisher? Like, what have they provided in terms of help and support to help make this game a reality?
I mean, I think the biggest one is patience and understanding, because this project has been rough. It's been 6 years of us developing this game, right? And I don't think that anyone else would have been as kind and understanding to us and ultimately get to the finish line like Annapurna did. They're also really good about creative freedom and just making sure that we're set up to actually deliver the vision we want to deliver, as opposed to basically living in fear whether or not players will actually play this game, right? They're willing to trust us and really take a chance instead of coming in and saying, hey, you got to do this and this and this to make this game actually sell copies. You know?
How has the stay-at-home orders and COVID affected your development cycle, if at all? I know a lot of the indie developers are already working out of their homes remotely.
Yeah, I think a lot of indies started working from home, so it's something we're all familiar with. It's nice to have an office, you know, we do miss that, but we've carried on just fine, and honestly, 2 of our most productive months ever happened during the COVID thing, so, you know, we're making it work. It's not ideal. I miss the team, you know.
I think one of the hardest things for a competitive first-person shooter, especially a tactical shooter, is map balance and map design. Can you talk about how you go through that process, making sure that the maps are challenging enough for the attackers, but also, like, you know, challenging enough for the defenders, so they're not just, you know, simply memorizing, like a good example is like Doom, just doing the map rotations, you know, picking up the weapons and going around in circles, knowing your rotation. What are some of the challenges in designing maps for these players to fight against it?
Well, that's where we get clever, right? Because in our game, we have this procedurally assisted level generation process, right? So what that means is every week we're shipping new maps to people. So we've got three levels in the game right now: the convenience store, the factory, and the kill house. And all of those aren't really static levels as people would be familiar with. They're more level archetypes or palettes. And what happens is we're generating new maps every week that we basically have a human come in and make sure that the maps got good flow and interesting tactical challenges, right? And then those ship out every week. And so people aren't learning a map as they would in something like Counter-Strike, right? Where it's just like, you know, you play a game like Counter-Strike or Siege, right? You got to know there are these peaks and these holds, and the enemy will be here at this time, right? It's all very regimented. And if you really want to be competitive, right, like you have to submit yourself to thousands of hours of rote learning. I mean, there's no way about it. You have to know the peaks and holds. In our game, that's just not the case, right? The peaks and holds are visible from the map, and what you're learning is sort of the abstract idea of how to attack this convenience store or defend it, right? But you're not focused on precisely this door gives me this pixel peak, right? It's more about like, well, if they come through the bathroom instead of reaching the shutters of the front of the convenience store, right? If they come through there, this is the best way to set up a kill zone and have mutually supporting fields of fire and that kind of stuff, right? So I would say that, you know, the first thing we've done to change the balance of these maps, as it were, is to throw out the idea that there is supposed to be a balance to begin with, right? Because some maps are terribly attacker-sided and some maps are terribly defender-sided. But this much is visible from the top-down view, right, from our planning phase, right? And what happens is if something looks really, really easy to take, right, both teams are going to take note and they're going to plan appropriately. And so the game becomes about reading the map and expecting what the enemy will do and planning against it. And so it all works out in the end because both teams, they're not really playing the map, they're playing each other, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that a lot of like high-end competitive just games in general end up having difficulty in is designing a map where people, like in Counter-Strike, there's always going to be a guy watching this corner. There's always going to be a flash at one of these two locations. Like it starts to become very like Excel spreadsheet type of things that you're looking at when you play a game. And if you can avoid that, that's great. But I know there's some people who actually like love the Excel sheet gaming. I call it Team Yankee when you just like try hard. When the game loses its gaming value and you're looking at a spreadsheet with numbers and statistics. You know what I mean? Like a game still should be fun even at a competitive level.
Yeah, and it's like, again, there are like, I don't know, probably 1,000 multiplayer first-person shooters out there right now with some kind of online population, right? Not very big for most of them, but why are people going to play yours, right? Like that's a question that every game developer has to ask. There are a lot of really mature and just great games out there, and so if you're going to make any kind of new entry, you're basically saying, hey, you should play this over all of these other offerings. So why, right? And I think the reason why is we don't have the Excel spreadsheet, right? We don't have this kind of emphasis on map knowledge that other games do. And if you're the type of gamer who really prefers that, there's so many options. Like we're not trying to win you over, right? We're trying to win people over who don't want to do that, who really want to play a game that's about cooperation and playing with your team, right? And not just learning a bunch of esoteric details about a game, right? Like they're learning really how to be tactical, if that makes sense, rather than just how to hold a very specific angle.
And then what's it like working in Unity, and like what are some of the things that software engine has allowed you to do during your time in game development?
Well, I mean, our procedural generation process runs through Unity, so that's pretty cool. I would say it's a game engine. There are choices here or there of why we choose this engine or that engine. We chose Unity in the very beginning because we're an indie team and it's the easiest to work with, right?
You could just say it's an engine. You're like, yep, it's an engine.
Basically, like they're just trade-offs in selecting any engine. I think, honestly, people emphasize an engine a bit too much in how a software project turns out, really, and it's more about the team's experience and their development practices that determine how a game really turns out. But yeah, Unity's been easy to work with in some areas and difficult in other areas, and that's just life with any engine, really.
Yeah, I mean, just sometimes it's an interesting question because usually, maybe sometimes there is a reason they specifically used Unreal or Unity or whatever because they wanted the specific feature or something. And sometimes, like you said, it's just an engine and it ended up working out well because we just decided to use it for no particular reason. You know what I mean? Yeah,
I mean, we chose it for ease of use. Honestly, I think Unreal is really good for making first-person shooters. With Unity, part of the reason why we chose it was it doesn't assume anything about the game you're making, and so that means you're a bit more creatively free to do things. But again, it's just more like this game is. How do I put this? It's conceptually interesting, right? In that, like, we're doing things that are very different. To my knowledge, we're the only game in history that has this level distribution process, right? I mean, there are games that do, say, procedural generation for levels, right? Runtime on client, but there's no game out there that basically is shipping you maps via Steam update that a level designer has come in and eliminated the worst problem with procedural generation, which is that every level just feels the same and they're all equally boring, right? With us, it's like, a human comes in and makes a couple of key choices in a level, like where to place a door or put this piece of cover here that changes the whole map, right? And makes their players think really, really hard about how they're going to attack or defend a level, right? But beyond that, it's a 5v5 multiplayer first-person shooter. Any engine can run that, right? Like, I think that if we're making something like Minecraft, right, requires very specific engine constraints, right? With us, it's just, but Unity's been really good to us, and they've really helped us they've supported us pretty well on the project, so we're quite happy with it.
So what's the biggest challenge as an indie studio when you're making a game in 2020? Obviously, you've been making it a lot longer than that, but I'm just using it as like a baseline.
Technical debt. That's any project. Is just the really bad decisions you made early on usually come back to bite you in the end, right? That, I would say, that's the biggest problem for most indie teams, because most indie teams they don't have the rigor of like real software development, to put it bluntly. And it means that you get snowed under quite nastily by mistakes that you've made early on. I mean, part of why this project took so long to ship is basically over the last year we decided, hey, there's some critical issues with our network architecture, and we're just going to rewrite the entire foundation for like 9 months, right? Like, that's all we did. And a lot of people have been asking us, like, hey, what happened to like the shields in the game? Where we have this shopping cart technical, kind of a fan favorite. It's a shopping cart with a machine gun on it, and it's a really, really powerful defender tool. And it's missing right now because it didn't make the cut for what we're going to release into beta, right? But why we did all that and why so much stuff has changed is because we made this foundational change that it's kind of like, how Rainbow Six Siege had their Operation Health, where they basically took a break from releasing new content just to focus on their core, right? Well, we did that before we released because it was really, really important for us to release a game that was technically sound, right? So that we could go forward and iterate in our live phase and not have to do something like that where we just have to put the brakes on everything, right? But yeah, I think that's just universally the biggest challenge for an indie team, right? Is keeping up the discipline and really realizing that making any game is an enormous engineering problem, and if you don't take it seriously, it'll end you, right? I will say though that in the not indie space, I think the biggest challenge for them is realizing that a game is an enormous technical challenge, and it's important to treat it with appropriate respect. I think most large institutions get that correctly, but from what I've seen, you have to ask yourself the question, why are people going to play this game over something else, right? And for many games, there isn't really a concrete answer, right? With ours, it's quite simple. This is the only game where you're really going to play as a team like this, right? Like, where you're thinking deeply about a tactical challenge and making a plan to handle it, right? And the whole game comes together and falls apart in basically 30 seconds, right? When your plan goes into contact, right? And there's nothing else like it,
And then and even especially for online games, I think the challenge is even greater because you have to account for a lot more balance and a lot more latency issues than you would if you're making like a single player adventure game where you're just dealing with bugs and no decisions, where like something like this, so there's loads of more technical issues on the back end.
I mean, absolutely. I think you can look at a game like Skyrim, right? And see, at the end of the day, you can release a single player game that has pretty substantial bugs in it, right? But people are still going to find the fun in that. And it's kind of like, I actually really appreciate that about Skyrim, is they kind of have like this honor system with the player where it's like, yeah, there's like a lot of exploits in this game, but if you do that, you're gonna have less fun, right? And you can play that way, right? But it's kind of on you to sort of like obey the spirit of what the game's about and have something good there. That's not an option with a multiplayer game, right? Because especially an adversarial one, if you have exploits like that in your game, people are going to exploit them and they're going to ruin someone else's fun. And so the bar is really, really high, right? In that, like, any kind of problem with the game is going to be weaponized against your own community and constitutes sort of an existential threat to your product. But then the other part is that not only is the bar higher, but the, like, literally your piece of code is running on 3 machines now instead of 1. And all 3 of them have to work properly, right? Or bad things happen. And what I mean is that you have, like, the client that you're playing on, you have the server, and then you have the proxy code running for everybody else playing the game, right? And if anything goes wrong in all 3 of those machines, or one of them, right, you get really bad behavior and people just ruining your game, right? So yeah, doing a multiplayer game is really, really difficult, and doing one that's competitive it's hard. You know, it's not an easy domain to play in, you know.
And then when does your game come out? I see your release date's TBD as of right now, probably due to COVID and some other factors as well.
Well, we're out in beta right now, and if people are motivated, they can find a way to buy the game. That's just done to, you know, we're at a point now where we're exposing this game to a wider audience and fixing the issues that are coming through scaling, right? But we're basically in no hurry to just let the floodgate open and have people play. Arguably, it's going to be the worst version of the game is right in the very beginning, right? So we're just trying to ease things on and figure out the most pressing issues and get the game to a state where it's really, really good before release. And then once we're there, that's when we'll take it into early access and see the game grow.
Awesome. Where can people find more information about Due Process, and where can they go to support it?
You can go to Due Process GG. I also encourage you guys to look up our official Discord. That's where most people are hanging out and talking about the game and playing games. And then you can find us on Steam, again, if you look through the right channels and buy the game there. We'd really appreciate your support. And yeah, we're looking forward to getting this thing out in earnest very soon.